Welcome to everyone again. So it's a pleasure and a honor for me to moderate this panel on dynamics for the adoption of CCCTB, which will pretty much look at what is the way forward towards CCCTB. So let me introduce Alain Lamassoure, whom you probably all know, who's a member of the European Parliament and Rapporteur of the CCCTB directive. Grégory Abate, right here, who's the Deputy Director of the Tax Policy Department of the French Public Finances General Directorate. And Wendelin Staats, who's the Head of Division of the German Federal Ministry of Finance for International Business Taxation. So now, as we have seen in the first roundtable, EU businesses typically stress that it would really not be a good solution if we go for a common tax base without consolidation. At the same time, we've seen in 2011 that the CCCTB proposal then, being particularly ambitious, hadn't been through, and so this led the European Commission to suggest a staged approach with 2 stages. Now, we will structure this panel into 2 rounds. A first one on what are your perspectives on whether CCCTB will be adopted, and a second one who will focus much more on, since we have the French and German representatives, whether the French-German bilateral cooperation could be or will be a game changer, or would it be, as it is seen by some, a risk on EU cohesion and further fragmentation. So first, I will leave the stage to Alain Lamassoure, who will first set the stage. What is your appreciation of the Commission proposal and its likelihood to be adopted? Alain, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne, and congratulations to Confrontations Europe and Institut Friedland for the organization of this important conference, and which is an opportunity for us to exchange views on this very important topic. I understand that later this afternoon you will be hearing Pierre Moscovici himself. Yeah. And that my co-rapporteur, Paul Tang, has just been heard. So I run the risk of repeating what he has said and having some convergences probably with Pierre Moscovici. 2 or 3 comments at this stage. First, it's clear that, and probably it has been said by Paul Tang and argued by panelists, particularly representing the business, that CCCTB has been presented by the Commission in 2 different drafts, projects, but we need both. And if the decision was taken by the Council, because unfortunately, being a matter of taxation, as you know, it's not the usual legislative procedure, and the decision is taken by the Council unanimously, the European Parliament being only consulted, and in some member states, national parliaments having to confirm the decision of their government. Well, if the decision was to apply CCTB and not the consolidation, it would be more harmful than helpful. It's clear for everybody, apart from some tax administrations. But it's a very important point for the European Parliament. Second, this reform, this harmonization or European approximation, this common framework on the corporate tax basis will be a real progress and relatively easily applicable if it has to be implemented, at least in the end, not from the very beginning, but in a reasonable time frame, to all companies, and not only to the biggest ones, to the multinational companies. And this for two reasons. First, it's a matter of fair competition between the big ones and the smaller ones. And I have on this issue a reflection of a countryman, a paysan. Either this reform is progress and why we should prevent our SMEs from taking advantage of the reform. When I say that, I am answered, but they will have the right to opt for this system. But it's difficult for SMEs to pay all the tax advisors to know whether, in their case, it is better to choose the European system or the national system, etc. So either it's progress, and why deprive the SMEs from this progress, or it is rather a complication of the current system, of the previous system, and why we should hurt, harm, handicap our multinationals at the global stage against the American or Chinese or other. So, for me, it's a step forward in the right direction. It's progress, and this progress must be secured in favor of all companies. And it will be far simpler for our tax administrations. Because today, it's already difficult for our national administration to apply and to implement and to control corporate taxes. Well, if every member state had to apply two different systems, it would be far too complicated. We must keep in mind something which is very difficult to express in public debate among our member states and in our institutions, but I take this opportunity to express it, that not all our national administrations are at the same level of experience and competence on these issues. And we must ensure that the content of the proposal, the time frame, are compatible with the best possible implementation in all member states. And the third point on which we have insisted with Paul Tang and the European Parliament, but we will come back to that in the second part, if I understand correctly, of our roundtable, is the necessity, the urgency to introduce the principle and, of course, modalities of taxing, direct taxation of the digital platform, because if we don't take up this opportunity, we run the risk that CCCTB will be delayed indefinitely. And it's my major concern. Another way of taxing digital economy or some digital platform has been proposed, particularly by France, and now is on the table. It's one of the two proposals made by the European Commission. And given the importance, the priority given to this option particularly by the French government, it is very likely that this proposal now on the table will be examined and considered by the Council of Ministers before CCCTB. And I fear, but the other panelists may have different views on that. They are better informed than me on the way, the proceedings of the Council of Ministers. But I fear that it will require months, because even if this option is presented as simpler both to be negotiated upon and then to be implemented, it will require unanimity. It will take months. Whenever unanimity is required, we run the risk of one member state even being in agreement on the subject, take this opportunity to take into a stage this issue, which is more important for some of their partners, in return for a concession on a different issue. So it will take months. And the window of opportunity to come up at long last with a common framework for a corporate tax basis in all the EU member states. This window opportunity was open with all the scandals, LuxLeaks crisis, etc., could be shut again next year or the year after. So my recommendation for, of course, the Council of Ministers, for the Commission, for the European Parliament, is to ensure that we don't delay the examination, the debate, and the decision on CCCTB if the urgency is admitted by the European Council of Ministers. It doesn't happen to the detriment of CCCTB.
Thank you very much indeed, Alain, for setting the stage with such powerful words. Wendelin, Grégory, the pressure is on. A lot relies on member states at this stage. So are we going to be ambitious enough given the next European elections? Are we going to deliver when citizens and civil society, businesses as well, are waiting to see? I know you're not at the political level, but you can achieve a lot at the administrative level. Please, Grégory.
Thank you very much, Anne. Yes, indeed, I understand that the expectation is great, and believe me, we are working hard. Wendelin is here also, and we are working hard together, I would say, to progress on this issue of the negotiation about the CCCTB and the other proposal for the consolidated tax base. Actually, the Commission has proposed a two-step approach in this regard, and we support this two-step approach. So we think that at the moment we should focus our effort on the first step, which is having an harmonized set of rules within Europe. But I would say that we are also concerned that there is this first step is not alone That means that we should also have inside the consolidation and also something on the rates, because we think that we cannot stay in a situation where there could be huge differences on rates and detrimental competition on tax rates. It is not enough for us to have a harmonization of the rules about the corporate tax base. So our vision for taxation is clear. We would like to achieve harmonization, consolidation, and approximation of rates. And then we must see how to reach this objective. I think that once the objective is clear, there is a path to go there. And at the moment, the first milestone we have in front of us is working on the harmonization of the corporate tax rules. And that's what we are doing now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Wendelin, is there a difference of appreciation with France? Isn't there a risk of getting stuck at the first stage approach? Do you share this?
I agree to Grégory. And, thanks first for having me here today. I learned already some points today about ugly and not so ugly taxes. And before I answer your question, I must say that I'm a big fan of the CCCTB. And I think most of the people I work with in France and in Germany are very supportive of the idea to have a CCCTB implemented in the near future. However, when I was when I started to get interested into corporate tax, that's maybe roughly 9, 10, 11 years ago, I heard for the first time about this big project of the CCCTB that was some years before the proposal of 2011 came out. And when I attended tax conferences, the speakers usually were saying, yeah, it might be implemented somewhen, but maybe I will survive it, but of course I will be retired before this will be happening. And now to answer your question, I think I'm not going to be retired, not because of the public budget, so I have to work forever, but rather because I'm optimistic, and I think there's, and I agree to Mr. Lamassoure about the window, the open window, and there's a momentum right now going on, and we should try to use it. I also want to answer or to make some comments about what you just said in your opening remark about the negative view you have about the double CTB, because I don't agree that not a consolidated but a common tax base is only negative or might have even a negative impact, because there are many advantages if you have this first step implemented before you move on to the second one. There's compliance cost, there's the tax efficiency and the transparency in Europe. If you have the same tax base in all countries, it's way easier to deal with transfer pricing when you have the same profit all over Europe. You don't need to consolidate it, but you can apply profit split methods, for example, and things like this. We have in Europe an ongoing discussion about going farther and farther with tax audits, joint tax audits. It's way easier for the tax administrations to do this when you have a common tax base. And therefore, I wouldn't be that negative about a common tax base. However, the goal must be, and that's the opinion of Grégory as well, as he said, that we should reach a CCCTB. And maybe the best part about the common tax base is that's the way to get to the CCC, because without a common tax base, it doesn't make a lot of sense to consolidate, because there's nothing to consolidate. And yeah, that's what we should move on. And picking up some of the points raised by Monsieur Tang earlier this afternoon, I think he made some very good points about the tax base and the consolidated tax base and why it's good or not so good. And first, I'm not so much interested in it if it's fair for my country or for France or whatever country of the 28 countries in Europe. If we have a loss of revenues or not, that's maybe a pity. And of course, I don't want to have a loss of revenues. But the discussion about fairness should be rather if it's a fair system for all of Europe, a fair system that's robust, that's tackling BEPS, and that is making things better for all countries in Europe. And if some portion of our tax base goes to another country, but it's definitely for sure that this tax base is taxed properly somewhere in Europe, I think that's still okay from my side. And I think all European countries to some extent must accept that this is the way it must be. Last point, I definitely agree with Grégory about the tax rate, effective tax rate discussion in Europe, because even if you have a very robust and very easy formula, like the one in the CCCTB proposal with taking out intangible assets that are very movable and focusing on revenues, on assets, and it looks very robust and very easy, but there's always profit shifting in Europe between European countries if you don't talk about effective taxation. And even if you have a consolidation, but you have countries with the tax rates of 10, 12, 13%, multinationals will find ways to get this somehow for their use and to use it. And consolidation will not be the end of transfer pricing and of profit shifting. We have related parties that are not consolidated. We have third countries. The directive is not saying any word, I think, about how we deal with this. And those are issues that are so complicated and so complex that I, once again, would say, let's start with the tax base and then move on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I fully agree with what you have said. Two or three complementary comments. First, on the tax rate. In the European Parliament, and I guess in all our member states, it's a matter of discussion between the left wing and the right wing. The left are in favor of minimum tax rate. And there were amendments in the European Parliament to set a minimum tax rate at 20%. So it was turned down. I prefer not to take up the problem of the rate, because we need unanimity. And politically, personally, I am in favor of a minimum, particularly a minimum effective tax rate. But we must be realistic, and it is politically impossible to get the required unanimity among the 27 member states if we want to address both the basis and the rate. And particularly, I think of our Irish friends. I guess there are some Irish friends in the room. When we, with Paul Tang, staged an inter-parliamentary conference on this issue 1 year ago, we invited representatives of all finance committees of all national parliaments in Brussels to exchange views. The most vocal against CCCTB were our Irish friends. And so our answer was, okay, we are ready to come to you in Dublin to exchange views with your national parliament. And it happened later last year. It was an interesting discussion. We had to be exfiltered by the ushers. But it was very interesting because for them, they consider that the rate of 12.5% is part of Irish identity. And they remember a terrible row with former French President Nicolas Sarkozy a few years ago during the financial crisis when Ireland needed financial help from their partners in the euro area. And in return for this help, initially President Sarkozy demanded that Ireland gave up unfair tax competition in increasing their tax rate. They opposed it and they won this battle. So my answer to them was, okay, I understand 12.5%, it's part of your identity. I don't question that. There is nothing in the draft proposal by the European Commission and in my personal amendments interfering with tax rate. We focus only on tax base. And tax base is far more important for tax fairness and tax justice than the rate, as you, Irish, have demonstrated with, for instance, Apple. In the case of Apple, what was debatable was not the fact that to the profits declared by Apple in Ireland, the rate of 12.5% applied. No. The real rate, the effective rate, was below 1%, due to the way to measure, to calculate the tax base. So if we agree on the tax base, everybody can adapt their tax rate. And it's highly likely that once we have the same tax base, there will be an approximation, a natural approximation of the rates. We will see. But something is clear, is that neither Ireland nor some other usual suspects will agree on the tax base if we want at the same time tackle the problem of the tax rate. Second comment. We need CCCTB also not only to ensure a level playing field among our companies in the single market, but also to avoid returning to harmful pieces of legislation or administrative practices from some member states in a few years' time. We experienced that 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was in the run-up to the coming into force of the common currency, the end of the 90s. We were preparing for this revolution of the single currency, and we wanted to be sure that all precautions had been made to make it a success. And then we review in the ECOFIN Council with the then commissioner in charge, Mario Monti, reviewed all our national policies which could impair the fairness of competition among ourselves once the currency union is made. And of course, the first of these national policies targeted was the corporate taxes. It was a time when some of our member states used questionable pieces of legislation or administrative practices. And then we set up two working groups at political level and administrative level. And at political, so we decided, there were 15 of us, there were unanimity among the then member states, including the UK at that time. It was Tony Blair's government, on the principle of a common European tax base. And we instructed our administration to work on this project. It was the lower level group to work on this issue. And in the meantime, because of course it would require several years before, for technical reasons, they come up with a common proposal, at political level, we reviewed our national taxation systems and we agreed to remove or to improve all of the national legislations and practices which could be too harmful to fair competition among ourselves. And then the rulings and similar systems used by some member states were abolished. And then the currency union happened. And it happened at a time where the growth rate was high, like now. So it was very easy. All the catastrophes forecast by some Nobel Prize awarded economists didn't happen. And so the urgency to put an end to these practices and to find a common taxation framework for the corporations was less obvious. And then this work was given up. And in the mid-2000s, we saw reappear in the same countries these pieces of legislation which had been removed. And it was the LuxLeaks scandals and the following ones. So, the risk today, if we don't put in place a real European common framework for the corporate tax basis, you can bet that before the next decade, you will see reappear those rules which have been again removed after LuxLeaks in the same usual suspects countries, and we could reappear either in those countries or in some other ones. Why not mine? So nobody's perfect on this. So one major reason for adopting as soon as possible CCCTB is to put an end to these unfair, outrageous rules and practices.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's move on to the second round, and it's pretty much linked to it, since there is a political, social urgency and economic urgency. Do you think, maybe Grégory and then Wendelin and Alain, that the French-German bilateral cooperation can be a game changer? And if so, how are you going to go about it?
At least I would say that we hope so. Just let's explain a little bit what is the Franco-German initiative on this CCTB issue. Actually, it dates back to an initiative, joint initiative of Chancellor Merkel and President Macron in July last year, which instructed, once again, instructed their administrations to work on a common position regarding the proposal made by the Commission on the CCTB. So that's what we have worked on, and I can say that we are very close to finalizing this common position together with Wendelin, and it needs still to be approved at political level, but I think that for technical the technical level we are very close. But let me insist on one thing. I think it should give the aim was to give an impetus to the negotiation, clearly, and it was certainly not to exclude anybody. It's an inclusive approach for me. That means that France and Germany could come, and that would be the first time ever that they could come and say, we have reached an agreement on what could be a common corporate tax base for companies. And then the aim is to rally other member states in order to fuel the negotiation. It's clearly this approach that we have, and that does not mean that we want to impose anything. We simply want to show that we can reach an agreement and that we take it seriously. And based on this, we would like to see the negotiation going forward. And then would come the question of the implementation. Our first best option in France, of course, is that the implementation of this common set of rules, this joint position, is through the adoption of the directive. Of course, if we will take into account how the negotiations here in Brussels proceed, and we cannot exclude, and our ministers have expressed themselves on this, that we could also send a signal to show that we are ready to translate some specific tax measures in our internal legislation. So that would be more bilateral initiative between France and Germany, but I would say that we are not at this stage. For the moment, really, the Franco-German initiative is about reaching a common position on the CCTB to make progress for the negotiation.
Wendelin, the floor is yours. What is still missing?
No, that's how it is. And I must say, from my personal experience over the last couple of months, I think it was a very fruitful and very helpful discussion we had together. And frankly speaking, the whole discussion with France is still rather a technical discussion. And the political solution with regard to the directive and the adoption of the directive on EU level must be discussed and will be discussed in the Council, and that's where it belongs to. but it helped us, for example, when I look into the directive and into my corporate tax law, and then I have some partner who explains me a different view on the matter from their perspective, in this example, the French perspective, to get into all the details and to understand what is the technical aspect we have to keep in mind during the whole process. It's more like doing your homework for going on the European level and talking to all the partners. And it's also, but I think that's mentioned by Grégory already, it's also the idea to have some, if we are honest, the CCCTB directive is not really a flying bird yet. It's still somewhere on the floor. And it's, I think, worth a try to maybe help it to fly. And that's the whole idea behind it. It's not really something, I think you mentioned on the phone that this might be a catastrophe or something. Or someone told me about the European process or something like that. That's definitely not true. We just want to help and to make it fly. That's the whole idea. And maybe one last point. We are only talking about the tax base right now. And I think that is a very technical discussion. It's not, it's a lot about revenues in the end, but the more political discussion will be the consolidation and where the tax base goes to in Europe.
Yeah, the floor is yours now, Alain, and I'd like to add another question to that. Prosperity. Here we have Germany and France. Prosperity of smaller member states rely heavily on their ability to attract investors through tax rules as well. So do you think the temporary compensation fund could be a good way, that you suggested actually with Paul Tang, could be a good way to make this transformation of European tax system possible? Just an opportunity to speak about that.
Yes, of course, it's a very good news is the French and the Germans are able and are willing and able to work together on this draft. And according to what has just been said by our panelists and what I am told in both in Paris and Berlin, is that it's kind of first the way our tax administration work hand in hand on this issue, and at this stage on CCTB, and hopefully soon on CCCTB. It's very good news, and it should be the same on all other draft pieces of legislation, community legislation. But it's huge progress, but of course, in the end, we will have to see the outcome, the result, what will come out of this work. And we must beware of coming out with what I would call the a night at the opera solution. We are commemorating the 50th anniversary of May 68 in Paris. In Paris, in May 68, everybody was Marxist. I was myself a Marxist, option Groucho Marx. And some of you remember A Night at the Opera and the remark made by Groucho towards a shopkeeper selling oranges with a billboard, here I sell beautiful oranges. And Groucho commented, why here? It's clear, it's here, it's not there. Okay, you can write that off. Of course, it's you, it's not me. Okay, I sell, of course, you don't give them, so sell. Beautiful, yes, of course. You are not to write that your fruit is not beautiful. Oranges, of course. everybody can see that it's oranges and not lemons. At the end, there were nothing. And what I am hinted is that in reviewing article by article CCTB, there are some representatives of some member states around the table to argue that, well, this provision on how to encourage research, it's not a matter for European framework. We must apply subsidiarity. So let's leave the final decision to member state level. On capping deductible interest rates, well, let's apply subsidiarity. It's not for the European level. Well, neutrality between different ways of financing investments by borrowing or by capital, well, it's not a matter for European level, etc., etc. And at this end, there is no beautiful oranges left in the basket. And my recommendation is, if all this exercise, in the end, come out with a very thin European framework, it would be better to have no European framework at all. So, I encourage, of course, France and Germany to work together, but to work together to strengthen Europe, and in this case, European framework, and not to empty the European basket.
Thank you very much indeed. I will now open the floor for questions. Okay, 1, 2.
Hello, my name is Louise Heenan and I'm the Irish tax attaché, so I thought it might be a useful time to take the floor. It's been a very interesting day and I'd like to thank all the contributors to all the different panels, and I'd like to remark on the differences that we've heard on the various panels throughout the day. As I address some remarks to this panel, I think it's worth bearing in mind what we heard from this morning at 9 o'clock right through to this evening. I think I should probably start with some of the remarks made by Mr. Lamassoure. I'll start maybe with the Irish perspective and the Irish identity linked with the corporate tax rate. I think in this room it's always worth remembering, because I'm not sure that this really is recalled by a European audience, but the Lisbon Treaty was rejected by Ireland the first time round. And the second time round, Ireland secured a protocol to the Lisbon Treaty that reaffirmed the tax policy. Nothing in the Lisbon Treaty would change the division of competence between European and national level on tax policy. And the second time round, the Lisbon Treaty was passed and we were able to move forward with the TEU and the TFEU. I think that's really important to recall. There's cross-party support in the Irish Parliament for the 12.5% corporate tax rate. It's not a division between left and right, as I'm sure Mr. Lamassoure realised on his trip to Dublin, which I'm sure is a great engagement. We very much welcome that, because that's the general Irish perspective as a committed member of the European Union to engage in all debates across all policy areas. So that's the Irish perspective, but really I work in the Perm Rep, and I think I'll get into the detail of some of the Irish government positions and some of the files that we've discussed today. I might start with the discussion we had this morning on rate and on base. So the Irish corporate tax rate is 12.5%. That much has been established, but it's applied to a very broad base. And the initial analysis that we've done in Ireland of the common corporate tax base is it would narrow the current applicable Irish base, and then Ireland would lose revenue from adopting the CCTB. So the discussion that was had this morning between the economists on the interaction of rate and base is something that we need to continue to have across all European countries, not just for the big European countries, but for all, whether they be open or less open, with a larger or smaller domestic economy. Those things all feed into the European Council debate that's currently ongoing on the CCTB. In terms of the Apple case, I think the government position there is pretty clear. We, as well as the company, have appealed the Apple case to the Court of Justice, and I don't really think it's worth getting into the nitty-gritty of that case here, on the basis that those really are issues for the court What I would remark, though, is that the CCTB proposal and the CCCTB proposal, as the German delegate mentioned, only deals with internal EU issues. So the Irish government has always been clear that we do not defend the arrangements that Apple were able to achieve by using loopholes in global tax rules, that the mismatch in international tax rules is an area where Ireland has moved ahead of many of its European counterparts to close those down as efficiently as you can. But aggressive tax planning is a global problem that needs a global solution, and we can and do continue to play our part in those negotiations. So that all said, I think I'm actually a little bit more optimistic than a lot of the speakers that we've heard here today about the current status of international tax rules and of EU tax rules going forward. I've been in Brussels for 3 years, and when I arrived, my counterpart said, "Oh, tax, you've got an easy job, unanimity, very technical discussions, and they take a long time." And in those 3 years, we have seen an international level playing field be agreed. We've agreed to a raft of directives under unanimity at the EU Council table. And I don't think we're giving ourselves enough credit for the incredible progress that has been made to achieve a level playing field of agreed standards that now member states are in the process of implementing at national level. But that's a pretty significant change to the tax rules in every EU member state, as well as the global implementation that we've heard discussed throughout the day. So that's a pretty significant change that we've only just agreed. The implementation date, it doesn't become effective on the anti-tax avoidance directives, on the information exchange that we've agreed. It's not effective really until the end of this year when the implementation date is met. So bearing those dates in mind, bearing in mind US tax reform and the juncture of enormous international change that we now stand at, I am really interested to hear about the German and French cooperation, the bilateral cooperation on CCTB, and I have a few questions. In terms of timing, have you set yourselves a time plan in terms of when we might see the outcomes of bilateral negotiations, technical or not? Because what I haven't heard discussed today is whether or not the bird that is CCTB, whether we think that the digital tax proposals that have just been published, how those two things fit together. How does the digital services tax, designed as an interim tax, fit with the larger, longer-term, significant digital presence? These might be questions for Gaëtan from the Commission, but I'd be interested to hear everybody's perspective on them. You know, do we feel that an interim tax fitting into a significant digital presence with obvious international consequences is something that fits into the plan that we've been discussing this afternoon of having a common tax base? How do the German and French proposals fit into that European perspective? And what do you make of the European debate influencing the international debate? I think what we've seen in recent years is that the EU has come together at the OECD table to take part in a very lively debate with our international partners. But I would just think that it is worth bearing in mind that the EU discussions, with all the value we place on them and the commitment that we have shown to adopt rules with our EU partners, we need to bear in mind that the EU always sits within an international context. For Ireland, that's particularly relevant, sitting as we do between one country in the US and the other country being the UK, but we are committed members of the European Union, and I think that's something that was worth emphasising. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another question.
Thank you. Very difficult to add something after this. I'm Kristina Budrytė. I'm coming from FTI Consulting. And I do represent a lot of companies that are very looking forward for CCCTB because it would help them to have unanimous rules throughout Europe. But after spending a lot of time in Brussels and talking about the taxation policy problems and difficulties between big member states and small member states, I always see that there is a different debate about what is fair taxation and if a low tax rate, is it unfair competition on tax, or it's simply the way how smaller, more fringe countries are actually attracting investment. So in the CCCTB debate, of course, the digital taxation comes in as a package deal because we cannot go forward with CCCTB if we don't take in digital economy. And current Commission's proposals are actually, again, distributing the profits of, or adding more emphasis of profits to be attributed to countries which have more users. So my question is, if we cannot ensure that the European tax rules are equally fair for all member states, how can we actually get those agreed? Because I hear the points of Ireland, and I'm coming from Lithuania. And then another point, if we incentivize countries actually to invest in tech companies, to invest into IT sector, and then after some point when this IT sector actually is bringing some profit, why don't we allow them to get fruits from it? Thank you.
From which country did you say you were coming from?
Lithuania.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Policy advisor on tax at Oxfam. A quick question for France and Germany. We very much welcome the push France and Germany to move forward on CCCTB, but I still wonder, what about public country-by-country reporting? What is the viewpoint of Germany after having a new government now in the Council on public country-by-country reporting? And what is the viewpoint of France? Because that's also still very much unclear. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe who want to...
Many things said. Maybe I start with the last question because that's the one I recall. Thanks for the thank. And regarding public country-by-country reporting, I don't know if there will be a change with our new government about the view on it. But from a, again, not so much political, but rather technical point of view, there are still strong arguments against public country-by-country reporting. And I don't say this, and friends I have and colleagues I have would always agree that I may be not a Marxist, but I'm definitely not someone who's very supportive of multinationals that should not pay any taxes. So I say this because I believe in the technical arguments. And the main, I don't tell you all the arguments, but for me the main argument would be we have within this inclusive framework in the OECD now more than 100 countries, I don't know, 111, 120 roughly, who want to implement the minimum standard. And as you know, the country-by-country reporting standard is a minimum standard. And therefore many, many third country, not European Union countries and non-OECD countries, we are talking about countries I would have never believed that they would agree to such a thing, are now willing to accept and to exchange the reports and the data they receive from their companies with other tax authorities. And if we in Europe, like now the proposal, and I think it's especially pushed by the European Parliament, comes through that we have, for example, a directive saying, I think it's in this one balance sheet directive, I forgot the name, that we should bound ourselves, that we publish our country-by-country data. Then there's no need for other third countries anymore to be part of this whole inclusive framework. And that's a very serious concern we have and many other people within the OECD have when I talk to them. And therefore, but I have never spoken to my new minister about public country-by-country reporting. I know that the Social Democratic Party is maybe in favor, rather for political reasons, because it sounds good. It's maybe a good-looking orange that's not so tasteful.
Thank you.
So, sorry, on CBCR, I'm not the right person to answer. So I don't want to. I could give you a personal opinion, but I don't think it's the aim of your question. So I will not answer on this because I don't know. But concerning the other questions, I understand, and I can understand the point given by the Irish person, for instance, or the person for Lithuania. But when we speak about fair taxation, I wonder what it is. Is it a system where some countries can offer rules that enable some companies to enjoy some advantage which can be at the expense of some other countries? I'm not sure it's really fair taxation. So I think we have the opportunity with the CCTB to design together something which would bring Europe in a more cohesive stance. And I think really we should take this opportunity. And about the tax rate versus the tax base, I think precisely the advantage of having common tax rules for the tax base, then it gives the countries the possibility to adjust their rates. As I told you earlier, France would support a mechanism through which the rates should be within a certain range, but still there would be room for maneuver, in a sense, for the states to adjust. But at least having some clear framework for where we are in terms of tax base, and then the comparison for tax rates would be easier, would make the situation simpler and clearer.
Thank you. Our Irish friend has made a comprehensive presentation. I cannot answer to your points, but thank you for your contribution, very informative. Two or three comments. First, you argue that CCCTB in the case of Ireland would narrow, would reduce the tax base. Interesting piece of information. So far, no member state has published figures on what the consequence would be for them. If you have figures, please publish them. First. Second, if that is the case, that means that you cheat when you attract international corporations in publishing a very attractive rate without specifying to what this rate apply. And if that is the case, the real taxation regime in Ireland is far less interesting for the taxpayer at these corporations than they could expect. And third, if that is the case, we have proposed in the European Parliament, at least on a temporary basis, the creation of a compensation fund. Because that's true. If or hopefully when we apply a CCCTB, some members will lose, some other will earn more, will win. If everybody loses, we will adapt the provisions so that we will avoid this absurd situation. If everybody wins, all the better. If there are some winners and some losers, it would be reasonable to compensate, to offset for some time, and a compensation fund could be helpful. With Paul Tang, we toured a lot, not all of them, but a lot of national parliaments, of national capitals on this issue. The idea interested in some member states, not in others. I leave it to you. It may be an option. Second comment. Today, in today's papers, we can read that there was a very important and bold agreement signed yesterday by the Irish government and Apple about the famous 30 billion euros which are now paid by Apple and sequestered pending the final decision taken by the Court of Justice. The interesting question is whom this huge sum belong to? Who does this huge sum belong to? Because it is, according to the European Commission, and the Court of Justice will have the final say, it is taxes that should have been paid by Apple in Ireland according to the Irish rules applied fairly. Taxes applying to profits declared by Apple in Ireland. What were these profits, or what do these profits come, what did these profits come from? Not only from Ireland, not only from the European Union, but from all the rest of the world, apart from the United States of America, and in the case of Apple, I don't know why, apart from the whole American continent. It's all the profits coming from Europe, Asia, Africa, Oceania. So, how can we ensure fairness and ensure that the distribution of the 13 billion, if confirmed by the Court of Justice, is made according to the importance, relative importance of economic activities of Apple in these different countries? I don't have the answer to this question. But my conviction is that now is the time to start raising these questions. And you are right, madam, not only at EU level, but at global level. And it doesn't only apply to, to the digital companies, it applies to all multinationals, including European multinationals, including French multinationals. It's a problem of transfer pricing today, or of consolidation, for instance, in the European framework. And clearly, I understand that there was somebody in a panel from the OECD in the previous panel, so probably he tackles the issue. It's a major issue. And we, the Europeans, and we, the French, for instance, we cannot argue that fairness demands that in the case of digital economy, the profits should be taxed according to the level of activities in the member states, and argue against this way of reasoning. At this time, there is a kissing member of the next panel, and we can applaud Mr. Commissioner Moscovici, please. Welcome, Pierre. it's a big question mark, and it is the discussion on CCCTB must be an opportunity to raise this issue. Last remark on country by country reporting. There was, Pierre, there was a question on country by country reporting. Of course, as you know, there is two different stages. The first stage is reporting to the tax administrations of all the countries in which multinational has activities. And there is a consensus. Nobody can oppose this principle. But there is a further proposal by the Commission and the European Parliament, particularly, to make this information available to the general public. I posed a question 1 year or 2 years ago to 2 dozens of multinationals we heard in the European Parliament, in the special committee named Tax Committee. I chaired then, and we heard all the digital giants and some other multinational companies, American and European as well as Europeans. And I asked them about country by country reporting, making it public. What do you think? And it was very interesting because more than 1/3 of the representatives of the firms invited replied, we do that already, we already do that, or we are ready to do that. We don't mind. That is very interesting. What does that mean? For instance, I come back to Apple. Among smartphone makers, there are 3 or 4 major global companies. Apple, Samsung, and 1 or 2 Chinese. Okay. If only one of them makes this information public, the other ones will be obliged to do it. If not, they would have the image of the bad pupil, of those who cheat. It's impossible. So I am optimistic on this issue because my feeling, maybe I'm too optimistic, is that whether we decide it or not at political level, competition will make it mandatory for all the companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's thank very warmly this panel. Thank you.